The music stops mid-note. One heartbeat, the air smells of spilled wine, and the crowd is loud with laughter, pipes and drums thumping through the festival Romulus arranged. The next, 1,000 people inhale at once. A signal has passed. A hand hard with dirt and iron locks around a young woman's arm. Her father turns, his mouth open in confusion, and a fist drops him into the dust. She screams. The scream vanishes under a wall of panic. She is dragged through the crowd, feet barely touching the ground. This is no ceremony. It is a hunt. And the prey is every unmarried woman who trusted the invitation. Inside the half-built walls of Rome, the truth arrives. The men are no longer shapes in the chaos. They have faces now, names. They are the exiles and criminals who followed a king raised by a wolf to this patch of mud on the Tiber. And tonight, they call themselves husbands. Romulus moves among the shaking women. His voice is not a warlord's roar. It is flat and patient, the tone of a man who has already decided. He tells them their fathers were too proud. He tells them this abduction is an honor, a rise in station. He promises citizenship, property, a share in the future of his city. He says they will be the mothers of free men. He says all of it while his soldiers stand with drawn swords, eyes fixed on the spoils of a war finished before anyone declared it. The realization drops like a stone in the stomach. They are not guests. They are property. Then time becomes the punishment. Days blur into weeks. Weeks into months. The first shock hardens into routine. The women learn the names of the men who own them. They learn the layout of the crude huts that are now their homes. They learn to carry the memory of families they will never see again. The real prison is not the timber and earth Romulus raised around his city. The real prison is their own bodies. Bellies begin to swell. A new life grows, half Sabine, half Roman, born from force. It is the only thing left to hold on to. It is also the chain that ties them here forever. When war horns finally sound from the hills, no one hears freedom in them. That is the noise of fathers and brothers marching to rescue them by killing their husbands. It is the sound of an impossible choice, a war that will make them watch either their past or their future burn. Let us know which city and country you are watching from in the comments below. And if these stories matter to you, take a moment to subscribe. It is the single best way to support this channel and keep these investigations coming. You're watching Romanus, your home of Roman Empire on YouTube. In a town called Cures, tucked in the Sabine Hills above the Tiber Valley, a man clasps a heavy gold band around his left arm. The metal sits cool against his skin, solid, familiar. It marks his wealth, his family, his people's claim to land they have worked since before memory. The Sabines are no rabble in mud huts. Plutarch calls them a colony of Spartans, a people who prized hardness and honor above comfort. They have gods older than Rome. They have laws. They have fields tilled by the same bloodlines for generations, and a strict rule about the marriage of their daughters. Their god Sancus watched over oaths. To a Sabine, a broken word was a stain that outlived the man. Today they are dressing for an outing, a day of spectacle. They are going to see the city of wolves. The invitation came from the Wolf King himself. Romulus called it a festival. The Consualia, in honor of Consus, a god of stored grain whose altar sat buried in the earth of the future Circus Maximus, uncovered only for the feast. On that day, horses and mules rested from labor and were led through the streets crowned with flowers. Everyone understood the real purpose. It was an open house for a new settlement, barely a generation old, founded by tradition in 753 BC. Romulus had opened an asylum on the slope between the two crests of the Capitoline, a sanctuary where runaway slaves, debtors, and killers could start again with no questions asked. Livy records it plainly. The city swelled with men, and almost no women. Rome was a settlement of bachelors with no future, because a city without wives is a city that dies in one generation. Romulus knew the danger better than anyone. Dionysius of Halicarnassus writes that he first tried the honest road, sending heralds to town after town, proposing marriage bonds and shared citizenship. Every gate stayed shut. The refusal was not shyness. The neighbors feared a Rome that grew. A city built on runaways, if it bred sons, would one day want land, and land is the one thing no farmer gives away. The Sabine men joke about it over breakfast. They will bring their wives, their daughters, their sons. They will drink the cheap Roman wine, watch the crude games, and carry home a story about the mongrels on the river. Tourists visiting a human zoo. They came not only from Cures, but from Caenina, Antemnae, and Crustumerium, whole families walking the roads toward the Palatine. Livy says the crowds came partly out of curiosity, wanting to see how large this new town had grown. They leave their swords at home. You do not carry a blade to a party. You do not arm yourself to walk through a cage of pitiful animals. That was their first mistake. It would not be their last. The festival ground sits in the shallow valley between the Palatine and the Aventine, the low marshy strip the Romans had drained and flattened. Dust hangs in the air. The smell of roasting meat mixes with river damp and animal dung from the racing teams. The Romans are trying. They have raised altars, marked a track, laid out food along the edges. But something sits wrong under the hospitality. The smiles stop at the teeth. This is a city of men. Young men. Hard men. Men without wives. They watch the Sabine families arrive with a focus that does not belong at a celebration. They watch the wives. They watch the daughters more. They mark the unmarried ones with the flat patience of a hunter counting a herd. Livy notes a detail that lingers. Some of the men had been assigned specific women in advance. The most striking ones, set aside for the leading senators, carried off to their houses by hired hands. This was not a mob's impulse. It was an operation with a roster. The Sabine girls feel the attention and take it as flattery. Their fathers read the same attention as the ache of lesser men who could never have such things. They feel no danger. They feel a little pity, a little scorn. They are wrong. The signal comes at the peak of the day. Cicero, in his History of the Republic, dates the festival to the 4th month of the city's first year. So young was Rome when it staged this trap. The sun tips toward the Janiculum and throws long shadows across the valley floor. The chariots have just finished a heat. The crowd leans in for the next. Romulus rises from his seat. He draws his purple cloak up over his shoulders, holds it a moment, then folds it and lets it drop. A stripe of red against the fading light. That is the mark to begin. The music stops. The pipes cut off. The laughter dies mid-breath. The Roman men move. There is no frenzy in it. They move like a pack cutting single animals from the flock. They pass the married women. They pass the children. They go for the young, the unmarried, the daughters. It breaks open at once. A father is shoved into the dirt. A brother lunging to help catches a fist across the jaw. The Sabine men are strong. They are also empty-handed and caught flat. They are a crowd. The Romans are an army that has been waiting for the cloak to fall. Screams tear through the valley and bounce off the hills. A girl who was laughing a moment ago rides a stranger's shoulder now, fists hammering his back, going nowhere. Her father, mouth full of blood and grit, can only watch. The gold band on his arm catches the sun as he tries to stand. It is only metal. It cannot reach her. Livy sets the number Rome later remembered at a few hundred, though Valerius Antius, an older annalist, put it as high as 527, and another source named it 683. One tradition ties them to the 30 curiae, the voting districts of the city. Each stolen woman became the mother of a district. The crime was folded into the Constitution. Plutarch preserves the strangest thread of the day. A woman of rare beauty was being dragged off by men of low rank when a group of higher standing tried to seize her for themselves. To keep her, her captors shouted that she was being taken to Tilasius, a young Roman of good name. The crowd cheered the name and let her pass. From that shout, Plutarch says, came the Roman wedding cry, Talasio, called out at every marriage for centuries after. A rape produced a wedding song. The Romans sang it and forgot where it came from. Within minutes, it is finished. The Roman men fall back through the gates with their prizes. The gates boom shut on their hinges. Outside, the Sabine fathers stand disarmed, shamed, alone in the settling dust. They tear their clothes. They call on the gods of the oath. But the god Sancus does not answer in the valley of Consus. Their daughters are behind the walls. The first night is a blur of shock and weeping. The women are pushed into a central square below the Palatine. Plunder. The spoils of a war declared and won in the same breath. They are divided by lottery, not by choice. A man steps up, draws a name, and takes a woman as his own. She belongs to him now. Romulus walks among them. His face gives away nothing. He does not shout. He does not threaten. He speaks in a level tone, the voice of a man laying out a deal. He tells them this was not his first plan. He had tried talk. Livy records the embassies. Romulus had sent envoys to the Sabines and the surrounding peoples asking for the right of intermarriage, the ius connubii, the legal bond that would let Roman men take foreign wives and produce lawful heirs. He was refused. The neighbors mocked the request and asked, according to the tradition, why he had not opened an asylum for runaway women too. Their fathers, Romulus says, in their pride, denied his men the chance to build families at all. So the blame for tonight sits with that pride, not with his ambition. Then he makes an offer, guarded by the swords ringing the square. They will not be slaves, he says. They will be wives, bound in lawful marriage, citizens of Rome. They will hold rights to property and to the household. Their children will be born free men, and they, the mothers, will be honored above other women. Livy adds the detail that Romulus went to each woman in turn, softening rage with the same argument that the fault lay with their fathers, and that the love and care of their husbands would make amends. He hands them a future, a share in the city he means to raise. It is poison wrapped in comfort, built to move the guilt onto their fathers and turn terror into slow surrender. It is the first law of Rome, spoken into being in that square. Might does not merely make right. It makes reality. History is not written by the just. It is written by whoever wins. The seasons turn. The shock of that day hardens into scar tissue. The women learn the names of the men who took them. They learn the rhythm of the place. Rome is raw, a city of muscle and will with none of the art of home. But it grows by the day. Romulus governs through a body of 100 men he calls the Senate, the Patres, and their sons, the Patricians. He divides the fighting men into legions, and the citizens into the 30 curiae. He raises his personal guard, 300 men named the Sceleres, the swift ones, chosen for speed and strength. New walls climb the Palatine slope. New roofs go up in thatch and timber. The men who seize them are not only thugs, they are builders, soldiers, believers in an idea. And the women stop being only captives. They grind the grain, they tend the fires, they weave on upright looms the wool that clothes the men. Tradition later held that Romulus, to honor them, freed married women from all work except spinning, ordered that men step aside for them in the street, and forbade any woman to be spoken to with a foul word in their presence. He also ruled that a wife who shared in a man's sacred rights and property could not be cast off lightly. The captors dressed their crime in ceremony. The women became threads in the fabric of the city that stole them. The line between prisoner and resident begins to smear. Then the last chain is forged. A missed cycle. A swelling belly. The first child of Rome takes shape. Half Sabine, carrying the bloodline of cures. Half Roman, carrying the mark of what was done. That child becomes a living bridge stretched between two enemy camps. It holds everything the mother lost, and the only thing she has left to hold. Motherhood turns into the strongest political force in the city. A woman may hate the man who owns her, but the infant in her arms is hers, her blood. To wish the father dead is to wish the child fatherless. The trap is no longer timber and stone. It is flesh and bone. A prison worn inside the body, with no door. News from the outside seeps in, each report another stone in the wall around them. The neighboring towns did not wait for the Sabine king. Their fury ran ahead of him. The men of Canina came first, a small Latin town marching alone. Their king, Acron, a fighter of high reputation, led them into Roman territory to burn the fields. Romulus met him in the open. Plutarch records that Romulus vowed the king's armor to Jupiter if he could win, then charged, killed Acron with his own hand before both armies, and stripped the body where it fell. He carried the armor back fixed to a frame cut from an oak, resting it on his right shoulder, wearing a laurel wreath, and singing songs of victory as the army followed. He hung the spoils in a temple he founded to Jupiter Feretrius on the Capitoline, the first temple in Rome. Rome called these offerings the spolia opima, the richest spoils, won only when a general kills the enemy commander in single combat. In the whole history of the city, only 3 men would ever earn them. The first was won in this quarrel over stolen women. Then came the men of Antemnae, who marched while Rome was busy with Canina. Romulus turned and crushed them too, catching them scattered in the fields. After them, the men of Crustumerium. Each time the story ran the same. They fought with passion. They fell to discipline. These outcasts and criminals turned out to be soldiers of a rare and frightening kind. Romulus took their towns, planted Roman colonists in them, and brought the willing families back to swell the Palatine. Livy says more people crossed into Rome than Rome had lost in soldiers, drawn by the offer of citizenship. There is one figure in these early raids the tradition remembers by name, Hersilia. Some sources call her the wife of Romulus himself, the one married woman taken by accident in the chaos, seized because she was mistaken for a girl. She went to the king and begged mercy for the captured people of the defeated towns, asking that their parents be allowed into Rome rather than sold off. The petition worked. A woman seized by force became the first to bend Roman policy by argument. It would not be the last time a woman of this story stepped between armies. Every victory the captors win makes the women's case more hopeless. A simple rescue is off the table. To free them now would mean grinding down a hardened, unbeaten army with 3 towns already crushed beneath it. The dream of seeing their fathers and brothers again stops feeling like liberation. It starts feeling like the shadow of a coming war. A war their new families might actually win. These stories are not told to unsettle you. They are told because they hold up everything that came after. The steel, the fire, the will that forged an empire began right here in these cold acts of violence and survival. If you believe this truth deserves a guard, then take your post. Join this channel's membership, the Praetorian Guard. This is more than backing a channel. It is standing watch over history itself. The Praetorians were the inner circle, the few trusted to guard the emperor. By joining, you become one of the few who keep these investigations deep and honest. You keep the fires lit. You stand the watch. Take your place in the ranks. The link is in the description. The women of Rome understand their position now. Walls on every side, captors in every doorway, and the deepest chain of all sleeping in their arms. The world of their girlhood, of Sabine fathers and gold bands, has become a ghost. The rough, violent world of their Roman husbands is the only world left. Livy notes how quickly the fields fell quiet after the raids, the burned villages, the widowed farms, while inside Rome the cradles filled. But the Sabines of Cures were slower than their smaller neighbors and more dangerous for it. Titus Tatius, their king, spent long months gathering the full strength of his people rather than throwing it away in a single rash charge. He would not repeat the mistake of Akron. He sent word to the other Sabine towns, wove alliances, counted his spearmen through a winter, and waited until the ground was hard enough for an army to move fast. Dionysius says he refused every early offer to march, telling his allies that Rome would only fall to a force too large to break. Then, one morning, a scout reaches Romulus with a report. A dust cloud is climbing the horizon on the northern road. Too broad for a caravan, too ordered for a raiding band. An army is on the march, moving in column, in silence, with baggage and siege gear. The main Sabine host has come at last, led by Titus Tatius. They are not marching for the daughters of Canina or Antemne. They are marching for all of them. And they are marching for the citadel on the Capitoline, the high rock that guards the whole city, where the fate of Rome will turn on a single act of betrayal from within the walls. When a girl named Tarpeia opens a gate she should have kept shut, the horns of the avenging army carry over the hills and roll down into the valley of the Consualia, where the cloak first fell. Behind the walls of Rome, the women do not hear hope in that sound. They hear the end of the world. From the raw timber ramparts of Romulus's city, the women look down at the ghosts of their old lives forming ranks for battle. The army spread across the valley below is no faceless enemy. It is a field of people they know. A woman points to a gray-haired man rubbing dust from his helmet. That is my father. Another finds a family mark painted on a shield. That is my brother. A third stares at a man in a plumed helmet and says nothing, because he was the one meant to marry her. Livy records that the smaller towns had already thrown themselves at Rome and died for it. Canina, then Antemne, then Crustumerium, each broken in turn. The Sabines under Titus Tatius took a different road. They waited. They gathered every fighting man from Cures and the towns around it. When they finally came, they came in the largest host Rome had yet faced, and they made camp within sight of the Palatine roofs. They have come to set the women free, and to do it, they must kill the men who now share their beds. They must kill the fathers of the children swelling in their bellies and sleeping against their chests. The women look at the rescuing host of their own blood and do not see saviors. They see men who will answer one crime with another, tear down the world they have been forced to build, and leave their sons without fathers. Not every woman on the wall is caught in that trap. One looks down and sees a chance. Her name is Tarpeia. She is the daughter of Spurius Tarpeius, the officer Romulus set in command of the citadel, the fortified crown of the Capitoline Hill. While the captive women are torn between blood and bond, Tarpeia feels something plainer. Greed. Her gaze slides across the Sabine ranks, past the faces, past the spears, and stops on one thing: the heavy gold bands each man wears on his left arm. In that yellow glint, she sees a door out, not back to her old life, into a richer one. She names the price of her loyalty, and the price is small. The tradition splits on her motive. Livy gives the version of plain bribery. Plutarch preserves another. In that telling, Tarpeia was struck by the looks of the Sabine king and betrayed the rock for him, then invented the price of the bracelets only as a cover for her want. Propertius, the poet, wove a whole elegy around her, casting her as a priestess of Vesta, who left her sacred spring to spy on Tatius from the wall and lost herself to him. Cassius Dio adds a colder note. He says even the Sabines who used her held her in open scorn. For a people who honor oaths above life have no place for one who sells her own city. Every version ends the same way. She dies for it. The citadel she guards is no simple gate. The Capitoline rises with two crests and a saddle between them. Its flanks bear rock on the side facing the river. It cannot be stormed from below. It can only be opened from within. That is why Romulus trusted it to Tarpeius, and why his daughter now holds the whole city in her hands. On the height stood the auguraculum, the ground where Rome read the will of the gods in the flight of birds. She was about to sell the holiest rock in the city. On that same hill, generations later, would rise the great temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the heart of the Roman state. She sold the future capital of the world for what a soldier wore on one arm. That night a bargain passes in whispers over the citadel wall. Tarpeia signals Titus Tatius. She will open a gate. She will let his men into the stronghold that controls the city. In return, she wants one thing: what his soldiers carry on their left arms. Tatius studies the girl. His face holds the contempt a man feels for a tool he means to use and throw away. He agrees. He gives his word. Some accounts say she meant to trick the Sabines in turn, planning to strip them of their shield arms so they would stand defenseless once inside. If so, the trick folded back on her. Under a moonless sky, a side gate on the Capitoline slope grinds open on its hinge. The Sabine warriors slip through, shields on the left arm, swords in the right hand, moving like water into a cracked jar. The guards on the rock never form a line. The blades find them in the dark, quick and quiet, before an alarm can carry down to the city. The citadel, Rome's strongest ground, its last refuge, falls without a Roman sword lifted in its defense. The enemy stands inside the walls now, and they hold the height that looks down on every roof in the city. Tarpeia steps into the torchlight to collect her pay. She is smiling. She holds out both hands, waiting for the weight of gold. Titus Tatius looks at her. Then he looks at his own left arm. On it, he wears a gold band. He also wears the heavy bronze shield of a Sabine soldier. He had promised her what they carried on the left arm. He tears the shield loose and drives it into her. The blow throws her down and wipes the smile off her face. "Take your reward," he says. Then his men obey the example. One after another, they file past the broken girl and heap their shields onto her. The first blows break her bones. The rest bury her. She vanishes under a mound of bronze. The message reaches everyone watching. A traitor can be useful. A traitor is still a traitor. Even the men who profit from the betrayal will hate the one who sold it. For the Sabine women in the lower city, it is a lesson in the arithmetic of this war. No one here keeps clean hands. The Romans never forgot the place. They named it the Tarpeian Rock, the cliff on the southern face of the Capitoline, and for centuries they threw traitors and murderers off it onto the stones below. A man could win the highest honors in Rome one year and be flung from that same rock the next. To be denied even that death, and to be crushed low instead of thrown high, was reckoned a deeper shame. Livy notes that some later Romans, uneasy at honoring a traitor with any tomb, still marked her grave on the hill. Her name outlived her by 1,000 years, and it always meant betrayal. The sun rises on a changed battlefield. The Sabines hold the citadel above. The Romans are pinned below, in the swampy valley between the Capitoline and the Palatine. Dionysius describes the ground as marsh, fed by springs, the kind of footing that swallows a boot and holds it. That low strip will one day be the Roman Forum, the beating center of an empire, paved in stone and ringed with temples, and the rostra where senators shout. On this morning, it is bare mud and reeds and a killing floor. The Sabines own every advantage. They pour down the slope from the height, their weight carrying them like an iron tide. The Romans fight uphill, boots sliding on wet clay, shields tipping, the mud sucking at every step. The clash of bronze on bronze rolls off the hills and comes back doubled. Spears break. Men grab at each other and go down together into the reeds. The air fills with the smell of turned mud and opened bodies. One man holds the Roman line together. Hostius Hostilius, a fighter of rare strength, whose grandson Tullus Hostilius would one day rule Rome as its third king and raze the mother city of Alba Longa to the ground. He stands at the front, roaring orders, his sword never still. A wall the Sabine flood has to break before it reaches the city. He binds the wavering ranks by will alone, planting himself where the ground is worst and the pressure hardest, holding the mouth of the valley shut with his own body. The flood does not break. It closes over him. The crush of Sabine shields is too heavy. Their numbers run too deep. Hostius falls at the very gate of the Palatine, and the men beside him watch their anchor go down under a mound of enemy soldiers. With his death, the Roman nerve dies too. The line does not bend. It comes apart. The soldiers who had smashed Canina and Antemne are gone. In their place are frightened men clawing back up the slope toward the gate. The wolves of Rome run like sheep. The Sabine charge is led by a captain named Metius Curtius, who drives his horse into the thick of the rout, calling out that the robbers of women fight worse than they steal. But the marsh that broke the Romans catches him too. His mount plunges into a bog and throws him, and he drags himself free of the mud on foot, while the Romans jeer from the slope. Roman memory kept that spot as well. They called it the Lacus Curtius, a pool in the future Forum that survived as a marked place long after the water dried and the stone paved it over. Some Romans of later ages could not agree whether the name came from this Sabine or from a young horseman of the same name who leapt into a chasm there centuries on. The confusion only proves how deep the scar ran in the city's memory. From the wall, The women watch it unfold. They see the men who took them, the men who fathered their children, being hunted down. The Sabines catch the scent of blood and press the chase, swords rising and dropping, cutting the runners from behind. The ground turns to a paste of mud and blood, and the reeds go flat under the boots of both armies. A Roman drops his shield to run faster. It does not save him. Another trips over the fallen and is speared where he lies. This is it. This is the freedom they once begged the gods for, and it looks like slaughter. Their fathers and brothers are winning. They are erasing the men of Rome. In that clear, cold moment, the women understand the shape of the choice. A Sabine victory makes them widows. A Sabine victory hands their sons to the men who gutted their fathers. A Roman victory keeps them married to the men who stole them and orphans them of their own blood. There is no outcome that does not cost them half of everything. Their past has come to reclaim them by destroying their future. The violence in that valley is the raw material Rome was cast from, and it does not soften with age. To follow it to the root, you need the chronicles that first set it down. The book behind this entire script is a monument to Roman history, an archive of the ambition and darkness that raised the empire, and it was the primary source for the story you are watching. To grasp the full weight of what happened between those hills, you should own it. You can find it, along with a curated set of themed relics from Rome, by tapping the View Products button on your screen. Open the shelf. See which pieces are waiting to fill out your collection. Look now, and keep browsing while the story runs on. The route collapses into a scramble for the gates. Romulus himself is swept up in the flood of running men. Livy says a stone struck him on the head in the crush and staggered him, and still he fought to turn the tide. He tries to wheel his men, to throw them back at the enemy, but his voice drowns in the noise of panic. His army is melting around him at the foot of the Palatine. Then Romulus lifts his hands to the sky. He makes a vow to Jupiter, promising a temple on that very spot if the god will only stop his men from running. Historians later marked the shrine that rose there, dedicated to Jupiter Stator, Jupiter the Stayer, the one who halts a flight. It was counted the first temple ever vowed on a battlefield by a Roman king, and it stood at the foot of the Palatine for centuries after, a stone memory of the day Rome nearly ended. Romulus turns to face the Sabines alone, at the gate, with the enemy closing and his own soldiers still streaming past him. Something in that moment catches. Plutarch says the fleeing men were ashamed to leave their king standing alone. A handful stop, then a few more. The line begins to firm at the gate of the Palatine. The Romans plant their feet and start pushing back down into the valley, and the two armies grind to a standstill in the mud, neither able to break the other, the dead piling in the reeds between them. The sun climbs, and the fighting does not stop. Men fall from thirst as much as from wounds. The Sabines still hold the high ground. The Romans still hold the gate. Neither side will yield, and neither can win without burying the valley in bodies. The battle has become a machine for making widows, and it will not stop on its own. Titus Tatius and Romulus both know it. Each has staked his kingship on this ground, and neither can walk away without a victory or a corpse. The women on the wall see it. They see that a Roman victory and a Sabine victory both end with them weeping over a grave. They have carried this war inside their own bodies for months, and now it is being fought in the mud below, with their fathers on one side and their husbands on the other. And in that moment, one of them moves. She loosens her hair, takes up her child, and starts down toward the gate. Behind her, another follows. Then 10, then 100. The captive daughters of the Sabines are leaving the wall and walking toward the killing ground, some carrying infants, some with nothing but their bare hands, all of them heading into the narrow strip of mud between two lines of drawn swords. The ghosts have come back, and the women are about to walk into the space between the blades, where a single thrown spear from either army will cut them down before their fathers and their husbands ever understand what they are seeing. The battle has hit its floor. The Roman line no longer exists. What remains is a mob of men clawing back toward the Palatine Gate. Romulus is carried along with them, a king with no army left to command. He screams at them to turn, to stand, to hold. They cannot hear him through their own fear. The Sabines press right behind, a wave of bronze about to break over the last stones of his city. His whole project, his city of wolves, is one push from ending as a line in someone else's chronicle. So he does the last thing a cornered warlord can do. He raises his hands to the sky and bargains with a god. He vows that if Jupiter halts this rout, if he makes these men plant their feet, a temple will rise on this exact ground. A temple to Jupiter Stator, Jupiter the Stayer, the one who stops a flight. Livy places the spot at the foot of the Palatine near the gate later called the Porta Mugonia, and the Romans kept a shrine there for centuries. 700 years on, Cicero would open his first speech against the conspirator Catiline inside a temple on that same ground, in the shadow of a vow made in mud. Something turns. Maybe the king's raw prayer shames the men within earshot. Maybe an officer finally grips a cohort and drags it back into shape. Maybe it is the old wolf pack instinct that pulled these outcasts to Romulus in the first place. A few men stop. They face about. They dig their heels into the bloody clay and lift their shields. A dozen more turn. Then 100. The retreat freezes. The mob knits itself back into a line. There is nothing heroic in the sight. They look like animals in a corner, ready to die on their feet, because there is nowhere left to run. They drop their spears level and charge back down the slope into the Sabine advance. The rout is finished. In its place comes something worse. The fight in the valley hardens into a standing war of attrition, a grinding match in the marsh that feeds men into itself and gives back only corpses. Plutarch says the two hosts had traded the advantage many times that day. Metius Curtius, the Sabine who had mocked the Romans as thieves, had only just dragged himself out of the bog when the lines locked again on firmer ground. A Roman named Hostus Hostilius had led the countercharge and gone down early, and it was his fall, some said, that first broke the Roman nerve before Romulus rallied them. Dionysius records that Romulus fought on with the head wound still bleeding under his helmet, refusing to leave the front, while any man could see him. On the walls, the women watch the new phase open. The quick terror of a Sabine victory is gone. Now, they must watch a slow killing that has no end in sight. They can no longer read who is winning. A Sabine drops, and it could be a brother. A Roman goes down, and it could be a husband. The battle stops being strategy. It becomes a wound in each of them, pulled wider with every minute. The valley below them, the strip that will one day hold the Forum, the Senate House, and the Speaker's platform hung with the beaks of captured ships, is a bog choked with the dead and the drowning. Hersilia grips the rough timber of the wall until her knuckles pale. The sources cannot agree on who she was. Livy calls her a married woman taken among the girls. Some later writers name her the wife of Romulus himself, and mother of his children, a daughter called Prima, and a son named Aeolus. Others give her to Hostus Hostilius, the man who had just fallen at the gate, which would make her a widow before the day was out. She feels the infant in her arms shift, her child, a child whose father and grandfather are trying to kill each other in the mud below. The thought settles in her like a stone finding the bottom. It is not reasoned. It is the plain sense of a mother who sees her young in a fire. This war is not about Rome or cures, not about honor or revenge. It is about the children. They are the only people in the whole story who did nothing. And this war, whoever wins, will ruin them. They will grow up fatherless, or they will grow up as the grandchildren of the men who killed their father. Both are a curse. There is one way to end it. The war itself has to die. She turns to the other women. Her face has gone hard. Their eyes hold the same thing hers do. She does not need a speech. They have been victims. They have been property. Now they will be a weapon. They move together. They come down off the walls and gather in the narrow streets. They tear the cloth at their breasts, the old sign of grief. They pull the pins from their hair and let it fall loose around their shoulders, as if walking to a funeral. They are not mourning. They are arming. They sweep through the city, pulling in every woman, every child, and turn toward the noise of the fighting. Livy writes that they came out from the houses in a mass, driven by nothing but their own resolve, with no man leading them. Dionysius says the older matrons went first, and the young girls followed, some still nursing, and that they came in silence until they reached the field. They throw the gates open and pour onto the ground between the armies. Picture it. A grinding brawl between two armies of hardened men, the air heavy with sweat and blood and turned earth. The sound a single unbroken roar of screams and shields and dying men. Into that walks a column of women in torn tunics, hair unbound, infants in their arms. They do not slow at the edge. They run straight into the gap between the two locked lines. They fling themselves between raised spears and falling swords. They make shields of their own bodies. They lift their infants high, the small fragile results of this whole war, and hold them up as the one thing on the field too sacred to strike through. The change runs down the line like a current. A Roman with his sword drawn back to open a Sabine throat stops cold. Behind his target stands a woman, his wife, her eyes on him. A Sabine with his shield locked against a Roman looks past his enemy and sees his own daughter holding up a baby he has never met, his grandchild. The arms of practiced killers go heavy. The heat in their chests turns to cold. The fighting stutters and dies, man by man, until the whole field stands in silence, ankle-deep in mud, staring. Dionysius says a hush fell so complete that the two kings could hear a single woman calling out from the middle of the field. The women have stopped the war. Now they set the terms of the peace. They hold the strip of ground between the armies, a wall of flesh no blade will cross. Hersilia steps forward. She turns first to her own people. She finds her king, her kin, the men she grew up beside. If you are angry at this marriage, she calls across the still field, turn the anger on us. We are the cause. She sweeps a hand toward the Romans. You came to free us from our captors. Kill them, and you make us widows. You make these children fatherless. It is not a plea. It is a fact laid out plain. Then she turns to the Romans, to her husband, to the men who became their new family. And you, she says, her voice climbing, if you kill them, You slaughter our fathers and our brothers. You make our children orphans, cursed to know that their fathers murdered their grandfathers. She lets the weight of it hang. Both armies are boxed in. Any victory she describes is also a ruin. There is no clean end to this fight. There never was. Then the women make the final move. As one, they drop to their knees in the mud, children still in their arms. Hercilia speaks for all of them. "It is better that we die," she cries, "than live as widows or leave orphans behind. Kill us. We are the cause of this war. Let it end in our blood, so you do not have to spill the blood of your own kin. Whatever rage was left on that field drains out of it. What fills the space is shame." The men look at the women kneeling in the dirt. They look at the babies who have begun to cry. They look at their own swords, suddenly crude tools for butchering family. They look into the faces across the line, and, for the first time, they do not see monsters. They see fathers-in-law, brothers-in-law, their own blood. Swords come down. Shields fall into the marsh. Romulus and Titus Tatius walk toward each other across the line of women and children who have beaten them both. They speak no word of surrender, no word of victory. The war is over, and not because either side won. It is over because the women made winning impossible. Two kings stare at each other, both armies disarmed by an enemy they never thought to fight. What follows is not a treaty. It is a merger. The gates of Rome open, and the whole Sabine people move in. Men, women, children. The two nations that were tearing each other apart in the reeds become one. They share the city. They share the government. Romulus and Titus Tatius rule together, the first joint kingship in Rome's story. Livy records the shape of the deal. The kingdom was held in common, and the whole seat of rule moved to Rome, though in honor of the newcomers, the united people took a name from Cures. They were called the Quirites, and Rome carried that name in its formal speech for the rest of its history. When a mob had to be shamed back into order, a general would address them not as soldiers, but as Quirites, and the word alone could sting. Julius Caesar himself, generations later, would break a mutiny with that single word, and the men wept at being called civilians. The Sabines brought more than their swords across the threshold. They brought their gods. The worship of Quirinus, of Sancus, who guarded oaths, of the war god they honored, folded into the Roman calendar and stayed there. They settled on the Capitoline and the Quirinal, the hill that took its name from them, while the Romans held the Palatine, and the drained valley between became the common meeting ground of both. That marsh, the same ground where men had drowned in armor that morning, would be paved over and become the Forum, the place where Rome argued out its laws for 1,000 years. The Sabine king kept a house on the citadel above it, near the very rock where Tarpeia had been buried under shields. The tradition even set the number of new families that joined the Senate. 100 Sabine elders, some sources say, were added to the 100 Roman patres Romulus had already named, doubling the council at a stroke and folding the enemy's leaders into Rome's own ruling body. Romulus split the whole people into 30 curiae for voting, and Roman memory held that he named each one after a Sabine woman who had walked onto the field that day. He also raised 3 new tribes, one of them called the Titienses after Titus Tatius, so that the beaten king's name was stitched into the census itself. The women were not thanked with statues alone. Their names were built into the machinery of the state, spoken aloud at every assembly for centuries. But everyone on that field understands where the true power sits. The men hold the swords and write the laws. The women hold the bloodlines. They command the future, They did not merely stop a war, they took it over. They used the violence done to them to force a new people into being, one welded from both sides and harder than either. The Sabine women closed the deal Romulus opened with a stolen kiss and a drawn sword, and they closed it on their own terms. Rome remembered them for it. The Matronalia, a festival held on the 1st of March each year, was traced straight back to the women who threw themselves between the armies. A day when husbands gave gifts to their wives, and prayers went up for lasting marriage. It was said, too, that from this day a husband was forbidden to make his wife grind grain or cook, in memory of what these women had done for the city. The joint reign did not hold for long. Within a few years, Titus Tatius was pulled into an old blood feud. Some of his kinsmen had robbed and killed envoys from the nearby town of Lavinium. And when Tatius shielded the guilty men instead of handing them over, the wronged party caught him at a festival at Lavinium and struck him down at the altar. Plutarch says Romulus took the murder with a calm that some read as relief, punished no one, and ruled alone once more. Romulus himself would vanish years later during a review of the army on the field of Mars, swallowed by a sudden storm and a darkness that hid the whole assembly. When the light returned, his throne was empty. The Romans, unsure whether he had been carried up to the gods or torn apart by senators who wanted him gone, chose the story that made him a god. They named him Quirinus and built him a temple, and the question of his death was buried under a shrine. A senator named Julius Proculus swore he had met Romulus on the road, taller than in life, and heard him promise that Rome would rule the world. The city believed him because it wanted to. The kings passed, the fusion stayed, the blended people outlived both men who forged it. Rome kept the Sabine names in its months and its rites, kept the wedding cry born from the day of the abduction, kept the memory of the women who walked into the spears. Centuries later, the historians still argued over the numbers, the names, and the motives. They still agreed on the shape of it. A city built on theft was saved by the very people it had stolen. So the real founding of Rome stands uncovered. Not the tidy myth of a wolf's milk on the riverbank. Not the lone ambition of one king. It was this, a mass abduction. A war that folded back on the men who started it. And the cold, exact strength of the first women dragged behind these walls. The Sabine women took a fate meant to break them, turned the sacred weight of motherhood into a blade, and became the true founders of the city. They were the she-wolves whose children, cast in blood and choice, would grow up to swallow the world. Thank you for staying to the very end. If these stories matter to you, subscribe to the channel, hit like on this video, and pass it to one person who needs to see it. You've just watched another premium documentary by Romulus, your home of Roman Empire on YouTube. Your descent into the dark heart of history is not finished. The video on your screen right now is the next chapter waiting for you. Click it. Watch it now. Keep going.